Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will attempt to be brief, but I really appreciate this opportunity to discuss this very important legislation. I'll try to summarize all the bills, and these bills are here today because we need an update to our clean water laws in Michigan. We need to update the protections to our land, our water, and our bodies. We need an update to bring greater transparency for residents because people have a right to know about pollution in their neighborhood, especially when we have such weak standards to protect the public health from cancer, kidney failure, birth defects, miscarriage, and other ailments that are caused by environmental pollution. We need an update to our pollution cleanup laws because our current risk-based standards are too risky for residents and too lax in ways that benefit the polluters. We need an update because our once strong polluter pay law was repealed in 1994 in favor of a system that manages current exposure and de-emphasizes removal of the actual pollution. Now, some people are calling for a restoration of a model that requires strict liability and full residential cleanups on every site. In fact, I've proposed legislation like that in the past, but that's not what is being proposed today. What is being proposed today is a modest change that preserves the current risk-based system, but that makes modest changes to improve protections for our water, improve protections for our land, and improve protections for our health. There are two main ways that these bills affect those issues. One is by requiring greater transparency in the process. Did you know that right now in Michigan, someone can be sitting on a polluted piece of land and not tell the state, not tell their neighbors? This is something that we should fix. When pollution is found, pollution that could migrate off-site, may even be currently migrating off-site, but the owner doesn't know is migrating off-site. Currently, they're not required to disclose that. I think they should be required to disclose that, and that's what this legislation does. This legislation also calls for better cleanups when possible. Rather than calling for every site to be cleaned up to pristine standards, we're simply giving the department more tools to say, in this case, removal of the pollution makes more sense than just protecting the public with paperwork like a deed restriction saying no one should touch that water again, or protect the public with a fence. Why is this a problem? This is a problem because right now in Michigan we have over 4,500 sites that have these institutional controls on them, wherein the solution to the pollution is just to manage public access to the site. We have over 4,500 of these sites. How many of our aquifers are we going to give up on this year? How many of our aquifers did we surrender to industrial pollution last year? Every year we're adding more and more of these aquifers and these parcels of land that we are surrendering to pollution and not requiring a real cleanup. There are a few other bills in the package. I'll try to summarize those briefly, but I know that sometimes my colleagues might have some things to say about them. A couple of the important things, there are two bills in the package that deal with extending the statute of limitations. They extend the statute of limitations for private claims, claims that citizens are bringing against the polluter for personal harm. And then there's another bill that deals with extending the statute of limitations for the state itself to bring claims against companies that have harmed the natural resources of the state of Michigan. Essentially what these do is they extend the statute of limitations around emerging pollutants. And the idea behind this is for situations like we found with PFAS. PFAS has been around for a long time. Teflon, Gore-Tex, has been around for decades. But we didn't know how dangerous it was until recently. We're just now finding out that PFAS causes real health problems that we weren't aware of in the early years. And the problem with our statute of limitations is that it doesn't start the clock when people found out that they were harmed. It starts the clock when they found out that they were exposed. And if they don't even know that the chemical is harmful yet, I don't think that's fair to our state. I don't think it's fair to people who are harmed. I think we need to extend those statute of limitations. In addition, Senator Schenck has a bill on medical monitoring that helps protect residents who are incurring personal costs because they have to go get tests for medical concerns they have that are as a result of their exposure. So you're going to hear after me from representatives from industry that the sky is falling, that if we improve transparency, if we tweak our pollution cleanup standards to provide a little more protection, to protect clean Michigan, to protect clean water, that no one will want to invest in Michigan anymore. But I want you to know that not only do I think that's not true, but we developed these bills in consultation with industry stakeholders. We spent a lot of time over the course of the last 2 years really trying to change these bills from ones that required successor liability or unreserved pristine residential standards for every site to once again dial that back and propose something that was more modest but that could still provide real benefits for the public. So if you hear folks saying that this requires unreserved residential standards on every site, that's not true. That's not what the bills say. If you hear people saying that restoring sites to pristine conditions can hamper redevelopment, that's not what this bill does. But you know what else hampers redevelopment? Pollution, contamination. How many of us have sites that have been left behind in our communities and are hard to develop, sometimes in really important areas in our downtowns that can't be redeveloped because of a gas station or a dry cleaner or an industrial plant that left behind problems for the taxpayers? That's why we have 27,000 contaminated sites in Michigan that we know of. Over half of them are orphaned, left behind for communities and the taxpayers to pick up the freight. So I appreciate your consideration. And I just want to remind you that today and for the coming weeks and maybe even months, you'll hear from business and industry that the cost of slightly higher protections for land and water is too high. But I want to remind you of the very real costs that our residents face when they get sick, when they get cancer, when their children miscarry as a result of this pollution. And I want to remind you that there's a real high cost that residents are paying for the fish consumption advisories in every one of our lakes and streams. I want to remind you that there are very real costs for our residents when parcels are left polluted, when parcels are polluting neighboring parcels. And so when you're going to hear over and over again about the cost that industry says is unjustifiable to protect our water and our land, I want to remind you that every molecule they get to leave behind in our land and water is another dollar in their pocket. And we're here to fight for the public interest. And while I have an open ear and want to work with our industry stakeholders to get a policy that's workable and that's sensible and that gets the best cleanup that we can that's reasonable, I just want to remind you that you're not going to hear from all those people that have been harmed by pollution in Michigan. They don't have lobbyists. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Irwin. And did you have, I had on my list here a couple of others that potentially would testify, Representative Morgan or Senator Schenck or Senator Chang if they wish. Looks like I think Senator Schenck is going to join you for a brief bit of testimony then. Good morning.
Thank you, Chair McCann and members of the committee for the opportunity to testify on Senate Bill 386. It was introduced last session as SB 610. Under current law, people have to demonstrate that their health has been harmed to sue polluters. This creates a problem because detecting health problems often takes specialized tests or imaging over time. That's expensive and most people can't afford it. These tests can be incredibly costly, placing an unfair burden on people, particularly those already living in communities dealing with cumulative effects from polluting industries. This bill makes polluters liable for medical monitoring costs when they expose people to hazardous substances. This includes PFAS and PFOS, but also many other substances that are hazardous to human health. This bill will help more people find pollution-linked medical problems early when they are most treatable. People shouldn't die for corporate profits. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair McCann. And Senator Irwin, thank you so much for leading this bill package. Senate Bill 385 is a companion bill to the bills introduced by Senators Irwin and Moss, and it amends the Administrative Procedures Act to add cleanup criteria and target detection limits developed by EGLE to the rules exemption under the Administrative Procedures Act, protecting them from being altered without proper review and scrutiny. But I actually really wanted to take a couple minutes to share an example of how important this bill package is for my district and really the whole state. As others have noted, over the course of time, and we're talking decades in many cases, we learn more about pollutants, their dangers to our public health, and sometimes we learn about a site's history of contamination, things that weren't necessarily properly documented in the first place. During my 10 years in this legislature, I've had the honor of representing 3 different districts, like many of you, and every single one has contained portions of Detroit's beautiful riverfront. The Detroit River is our precious natural resource and beloved by the residents of Detroit and the region. It's also a major source of drinking water for the region. It's an important part of what has also made the city of Detroit the trade and economic hub that it is today, but in its many years of history, much of the industrial activity has caused innumerable environmental challenges for our land and water. And when millions of people use the Great Lakes for drinking water, the need for expedient notification requirements about hazardous substance releases is obvious. Just before Thanksgiving 2019, there was a major dock collapse on the Detroit River at the former Revere Copper property operated by Detroit Bulk Storage in Southwest Detroit, then in my district, caused by the combination of high water levels and the tremendous weight of the aggregate stored on site. This location had once had radioactive contamination because it was a former munitions site for the U.S. Department of Defense. Revere Copper and Brass operated this site in the 1920s and for a few decades, and the Department of Energy employed Revere to roll uranium rods used for atomic bomb construction under the Manhattan Project. Uranium was last used at the facilities into the 1950s. The facility did close operations in 1984 and was demolished. But when the dock collapsed, the operator of the site failed to notify Eagle or any other public officials. And part of the reason why may have been because the operator, our understanding is that the operator at the site didn't actually have a complete sense of what types of contamination or substances might have been released into the water, so there wasn't a clear state requirement for reporting. State and local officials were only made aware of the dock failure and the release of soil and sediment into the river after a resident noticed the collapsed site from the water and submitted pictures to the media, as well as to me directly, and both the media and I contacted Eagle, and they moved quickly then on their response. After that incident, I began working with colleagues on legislation that included a 24-hour notification requirement, a small part of what the much more comprehensive Senate Bill 391 requires, which is better and stronger. The Revere Copper dock collapsed in 2019, and also the sinkhole that emerged 2 years later at the same site were glaring examples of how important it is that we have an ongoing publicly available inventory about contaminated sites, response action plans, environmental assessments, and more, especially for sites along major waterways. As residents were learning about the first collapse in 2019 and the history of the site with uranium rods, no one among the public had a great way to be able to quickly find out what exactly was going on at the site and what types of contamination we were facing. So as you can imagine, people were extremely worried for their health and safety. Thankfully, Eagle found no uranium at the site any longer, but there was mercury, PCBs, and PAHs. So we worked on legislation to address the need for a public database of contaminated sites along major waterways a few terms ago, and I'm pleased that this polluter accountability bill package, which is much broader and comprehensive, is finally being heard in the Senate today. Michigan's agricultural and industrial history are an important consideration to our future as a state where people want to live, to farm, to start a business, and to spend recreational time and money. But we need to act responsibly and make sure that as a state we are fully informed about the types of contamination that exist across sites, the remediation that's needed, and plans to ensure due care. When we are dealing with a situation like the dock collapse or countless other contamination sites across the state, time is critical. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much, Senator. And Representative Morgan, thank you for joining us. Please proceed.
Thank you, Chair McCann and committee members. I appreciate you having this hearing today and the Senate's leadership on this issue, this critical issue of addressing the urgent crisis of contamination that Michigan is facing, one that has been created by corporate negligence and sustained political inaction. The polluter pay package that we have before you addresses this issue. We have more than 24,000 confirmed contaminated sites across our state. That's 24,000 threats to our drinking water, our land, and our communities. They're in urban and rural places, big and small. There are sites all across our district and each of our districts as legislators, and far too many of those are not being cleaned up. And if any are, it's on the backs of taxpayers rather than polluters. It's not just bad policy, it's a failure of environmental and economic justice. And that's exactly why we're reintroducing this bicameral polluter pay package. Back in the 1990s, Michigan had some of the strongest polluter cleanup laws in the country. We believed that if property owners made a mess, they were responsible for cleaning it up. But in 1995, after corporate lobbyists aggressively lobbied the legislature, gutted this law, and the consequences for regular people have been devastating. Right now, the polluters can walk away or just cover up the mess and leave. They can delay, they can deny doing anything. And if you live near one of these sites, you just hope it doesn't show up in your drinking water. It's time that we put an end to this. The legislation gives Eagle and regulators the tools and resources they need to require stronger cleanups, restore contaminated areas, and track pollution after the fact. It makes them pay not just the people who are suffering consequences of these decisions, but the actual individuals who've made the mess in the first place. It also ends the absurdity of our backwards statute of limitations laws by aligning them with federal law. Right now, if pollution isn't discovered within 7 years of a spill, the polluter can't be held accountable. And even if people get sick later, they're still not held accountable. The package instead starts the clock when contamination is discovered, not when it has occurred. And we're making polluters pay for medical monitoring costs when they expose people to harm. People should not have to wait to get sick before they ask for help. This isn't just about punishing anyone, it's about demanding accountability and delivering justice. It's about protecting our families. It's making sure that good companies don't have to compete with bad actors, cutting corners to save money. We've worked with Eagle, environmental groups, local governments, and industry stakeholders to get this right. We're focused on the polluter, not the innocent buyer or the brownfield developer trying to improve their community, or any company trying to do the right thing and invest in our great state. This follows a relatively simple principle. If you poison our land, our water, or our people, you have to pay to clean it up. This is a common sense solution to a major problem in our state. We want manufacturing and vitality and economic development in Michigan, and I believe that we are on the cusp of beginning to grow again as a state and getting these investments, but we must do it right. Let's pass common sense legislation to clean and protect our state, and we need to do it right for the people and protect their health and our environment at the same time. Thank you.